Beasley, I'll start with you. And we were listening to your guys' testimony. I apologize for being late. Somehow they've scheduled multiple hearings that are all of importance to Colorado. But nothing more important than this. Mr. Beasley, I want to thank you for your work with the national parks. The Amache National Historic Site, I think would provide an unparalleled opportunity for Coloradans and Americans to learn about the horrors of Japanese internment and ensure that our collective memory of these atrocities does not diminish with time. Survivors and descendants are engaged, they're watching closely. In many cases, they've been waiting their whole lives for this designation. So can you speak a little bit about the cultural benefits of passing this legislation now, while we still have the ability to hear their stories and make sure those stories are preserved and passed along?
Yes, sir. Thank you for your question. As you're probably aware, there's currently a special resource study focused on Amache that's currently underway that was authorized under the Dingell Act. Amache tells the story of the Granada Relocation Center, which was one of 10 relocation centers that were built during World War II to detain Japanese Americans who were forcibly removed from the West Coast under the terms of an executive order. And over 10,000 people passed through Amache, which at its peak housed over 7,300 incarcerees, about 2/3 of whom were U.S. citizens. So without question, Amache tells the story of a painful and shameful time in our nation's history.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I think that's important to make sure that we're all on that same page. Ms. Capon, thank you for joining us. Even if by Zoom, we've all become so accustomed to Zoom, it's almost as good as being in person. You mentioned in your testimony that the national historic sites can often revitalize communities economically. And I know firsthand, I opened one of the first brew pubs in the country back in 1988 and got a historic designation for our building and then eventually our neighborhood. And then did the same thing in Omaha and Des Moines, Rapid City, South Dakota. And we saw great benefit from taking history and making sure that it was preserved and available. And I think the Amache National Historic Site, the cultural benefits there are so numerous, and I think even when our history is shameful, we need to make sure we preserve it. So I thought I'd ask you whether, in terms of the economic benefits of establishing a national historic site in a place like Grenada, Colorado, which is a agricultural community, it's a population a little over 500, some smaller communities around it, but a place still trying to grow and trying to add businesses.
So I think that, and just from the reference from national heritage areas, national heritage areas span a lot of different landscapes. They span urban to rural communities. So when you add a historical site, not only is it, and this is the most important part, is it's deeply meaningful to preserving our history and sharing it, as you said, so that we don't lose that collective memory. And oftentimes in places like that, people pause and reflect, and they need to pause and reflect, but they often stay in a place. And that can create new small businesses, whether it's a cafe, whether it's a small restaurant, or whether it's, additional interpretation that just keeps people to stay a little bit longer there, to think more deeply about that story. That's what we see throughout national heritage areas, and that's part of the significance of historic preservation, is that it should be deeply reflective. and it should be meaningful. It's very different than an amusement park where you can go through and get out, and it's exciting. History is exciting as well, but it's also reflective, and the economic benefits to communities often surround that. So if you go to Old Fort Niagara here in Niagara Falls National Heritage Area, it makes you really think about the layers of history that were shaped there, and you're more likely to stay. You're more likely to have a meal in the nearby community. You're more likely to say, next time when I want to schedule a trip, maybe I'll go back there.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Actually, while I was governor in Colorado, we moved our cultural affairs into the Office of Economic Development for many of those same reasons. I yield back, Mr. Chair.